Hello and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Kay Loyan. Our guest today is Dr. Stephen Hassen, author of The Cult of Trump and a world-renowned cult expert. He has written numerous books on mind control and understanding cult behavior. His life's mission to dissect and reveal the insidious techniques used by cults and authoritarian leaders to deceive and dominate. Dr. Hassen has created the BITE model of authoritarian control and will be dissecting that model for us today. His books include The Cult of Trump, Combating Cult Mind Control, and Freedom of Mind, considered foundational texts in unraveling the complex psychology of influence and control. He is also the founding director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center. Let's welcome Dr. Stephen Hassen. Welcome, Dr. Hassen. You're one of the foremost experts in cults in the United States and around the world. Tell us, how did you get to become such a renowned expert?
Uh, it's an interesting story to keep it brief. In 1974, when I was 19 and an upper junior at Queens College in New York City, my girlfriend abruptly dumped me. I was sitting in the cafeteria waiting for my classes, and a few women pretending to be students recruited me into a front group of the Moonies cult. And I wrote my story up in my first book, Combating Cult Mind Control. But I basically experienced the radicalization where my mind was hacked and I became a right-wing fascist and turned my back on my family, my education, my religion. I'm Jewish. And believed that Moon was the Messiah and that democracy was satanic. And I was a fanatic. And I got out after a near fatal van crash due to sleep exhaustion, left me in the hospital away from the cult for 2 weeks, led to me contacting my sister, which led to a voluntary deprogramming effort, which I didn't want to leave. And I was 100% sure that it wasn't a cult I was in or I wasn't brainwashed, but I wanted to prove it to my family. So I agreed to meet for several days with the ex-Moonies, and then I learned about Chinese communist brainwashing from Robert J. Lifton's 1961 book, The Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, which was a study of brainwashing in China. And the lights started turning on again. And I actually reached out to Dr. Lifton when I woke up and realized Moon wasn't the Messiah and that my mind had been hacked. And he more or less I credit for my career of 48 years to this moment, because he said to me, I just studied it secondhand, but you've lived it and they did it to you, you did it to other people. And what you're describing is so much more sophisticated than what the Chinese were doing in the 50s. You should study psychology and explain it to people like me. And there I was, a college dropout with a cast on my leg, looking at this Yale psychiatrist who had written numerous books at that point. And I was like, I can do that. I can study psychology. And my life has been unpacking my own experience from my own therapy, partly, but also it's a fascinating thing to understand how the mind works, what social psychology is. And my most recent focus is the law. I did my doctoral dissertation on my BITE model, which stands for Controlling Behavior, Information, Thoughts, and Emotions.
Yeah, tell us more about the BITE model. I think that's a fascinating thing for people to understand.
Yeah, so essentially, Lifton had an eight-part model for evaluating brainwashing. He was an Air Force psychiatrist. Margaret Singer had a six-condition model. Edgar Schein had a model, but they were all qualitative models based on interviews with people coming out of Chinese communist brainwashing. And as I learned more and more about social psychology, I came across very early on the notion of cognitive dissonance theory by Leon Festinger. He published it in 1957. He studied a UFO cult that was telling doctors and other followers to sell everything because the flying saucers would arrive on a mountain. He and his students wanted to study what would happen when the flying saucer didn't arrive because he was pretty confident there was not going to be a flying saucer. And to his amazement, people believed more, not less, which is counterintuitive. So he came up with this thoughts, feelings, and behaviors model. And that if you can get people to do extreme behaviors, they rationalize it to feel good about it. And that's the foundation for cognitive behavioral therapy, I might add. So, anyway, I just started playing with those three variables: thought control, emotional control, behavioral control. And I started looking at how my experience in the cult functioned. And I started writing out variables of deceptive recruitment was under information control, etc. And then as I kept trying to unpack what are the variables, I had to make another component, which is information control, because human beings are indeed biopsychosocial beings. We're social beings, and we need information to decide stuff and to know what's reality. So so I wrote it up in 1985 for my master's thesis. I published it in 1988, but it wasn't until I think it was 1999 that a Christian minister friend said to me, you can take those four elements and change the order, call it BITE, and then people could remember it more easily. So the BITE model was born. And I did my doctoral dissertation taking all of the variables, things like sleep deprivation, privacy deprivation, phobia installation, thought stopping. So I organized them, turned them into Likert scale of never to always. And I administered the survey anonymously to over 1,200 participants, and we had a high factor analysis for authoritarian control. So for me, that became the basis for a framework for the law to be able to look at any relationship with these four overlapping components and say this is undue influence or authoritarian control.
Okay, so but the BITE model is behavior, information, thought, and emotional control.
Right. But
And we
there's a laundry list of sub-variables under those.
right.
Yes.
And that includes what? Lie and skew, fear mongering, blame and divide, brand and label, language framing, and bullying and shaming are some. Am I correct?
Well, I use different words, and and this is just to show your audience that's listening, there's a lot of variables under each one
Right.
of these. We actually did a loading analysis, and we could take the 130 odd questions and make them into 40 of the most important ones. And then people could look at my influence continuum model, which talks about ethical influence to unethical. This is bite model stuff, and get
Mhm.
a number of how authoritarian their family was, or their religious group was, or their political. Look at China, look at North Korea. We have very extreme mind control being used there on people. They can't think for themselves or express themselves or ask questions or read dissonant information.
Now you wrote the book, The Cult of Trump. Let's start there. What do you see in the people that follow Trump, and what commonalities do they have with cults?
So, first, let me say that when I was asked to write this book with this title, I was very reluctant because I knew it would turn off all of the true believers. But what I did know is Donald Trump had the stereotypical profile of cult leaders, which I used for the book in chapter 3, Eric Fromm's malignant narcissism frame that he came up with analyzing Hitler. So in chapter three, I compare Trump with Sun Myung Moon, my former cult leader, Hubbard of Scientology, Jim Jones of People's Temple. But what I came to understand is that the cult of Trump is comprised of a lot of cult members, actual cult members of other cults, whose leaders are directing their believers to follow Trump and believe that Trump is a great man and that, God wants him to be president and he won in 2020, etc. So, having framed that, what I want to say is the public walks around thinking about brainwashing that it would only happen to other people, not them, weak people, stupid people, whatever. It's just not true at all. And I write about different followers in the cult of Trump, and I think the media does a real disservice to the public to try to call them names, moronic and idiots, etc., and because they don't understand brainwashing. And they also make the error of saying these people are permanently brainwashed. And we know for a fact that's not true. If brainwashing was permanent, I'd still be a Mooney. But I got out 48 years ago because I had information to reality test my experience by, which is why I did the bite model and why I'm creating a survey, anonymous survey anyone can take. No one will know they're doing it. And they can analyze whatever group they're in, or family system, or therapist relationship, and they can get a number on the influence continuum of how authoritarian a situation they're in and leave, hopefully.
I think one of the problems today is the media is not providing enough information. There's too much disinformation out there. And if people don't change the channel and don't look at alternate sources of media, they're going to get polarized. And I think that's what, for instance, Fox News caters to very right-wing conservative viewers. And and I know for a fact, as an attorney, I've looked at some of the filings, and they've, even though their own attorneys have said, well, this is entertainment, it's up to the reasonable person to find out the facts for themselves. They've put that in their filings, especially with on the Dominion case where there was a lawsuit. So from that standpoint, how can people get to change the channel when all this information is coming at them, and it's kind of, maybe perhaps it could be feeding some insecurities they have themselves, or some fears, innate fears that they have. So how do we get them to, like I said, change the channel and look for alternate sources of media?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and there were checks and balances on media that were taken out of place by lobbyists who wanted to do information control and manipulation. I should add that there are, I believe, five major corporations controlling all the mainstream media. We know Sinclair bought up a lot of smaller television stations around the country and are telling them national news, which is all right skewed. And so the critical thing to also that I want to add is that we're living in a digital age now where information has been gathered on Americans and people around the world, where there are profiles now. I'm told there's 5,000 data points on every voting American that's in the dark web, and there are algorithms and supercomputers that can be used to nudge people to more extreme positions on the left or the right, or make them give up or not want to vote at all, or want to hurt themselves. So what people need to get educated about is how to protect their own mind. And part of that is not looking at your phone 8 to 10 hours a day and getting your news only from certain sources, but you need to take in information that's dissonant. And it's a major part of what my approach is to say to people, listen, if you're in a mind control cult, you're told don't listen to the other side. It's fake news. It's Satan. And so if you accept that premise and don't say
Mhm.
I'm an intelligent person, I want to hear what they have to say and decide for myself if it has facts and if it's grounded and if it resonates with my own direct experience or not. And that's where the solution long term, I believe, is psychoeducation. Teaching everyone how to tell the difference between ethical influence, like informed consent, like respect for science and experts, understanding we're living in an age of psychological warfare by Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, that are co-opting Americans who are buying off American politicians. I should add fossil fuel corporations and countries as well.
Yes.
And I learned, by the way, Mary Kay, that my former cult, the Moonies, that own the Washington Times Foundation, has been the center for climate science denial for 50 years. In other
That's
words,
amazing. I did
just
not
as the
know that.
tobacco industry hired experts to say there's no causality between smoking and cancer, even though they knew it was not true, they wanted to make money. Fossil fuel corporations and countries are doing the same playbook, trying to cast questions whether or not it's really proven that there's global warming when 98% of all climate scientists uh, can show the evidence that we're changing our planet in a very deleterious way.
Now let's to get back to Trump and his control of the media. Um, what are the mechanisms that he uses to enthrall his audience? Can you speak a little bit about that?
So we know for a fact that Russia is involved with Donald Trump for decades. I believe
Mhm.
the evidence is he was recruited in 1987 as an asset into Soviet Union. This was before it fell. And so the techniques that you're asking me about, I know that he has learned something called neuro-linguistic programming or NLP, which was a system developed based on the work of Milton Erickson, a psychiatrist who developed a process-oriented hypnosis regime to help people as a psychiatrist. But this formula is being used to manipulate minds. And the simple thing to understand about his techniques of manipulation is as a malignant narcissist, he takes no responsibility for his lies. He's a pathological liar. He thinks he's above the law. Anything that he's doing, he projects on others to misdirect their attention. But again, I want to state categorically there are bad actors that are helping Donald Trump, like Elon Musk owns the former Twitter, X. Mark Zuckerberg, other people on platforms say
Enablers.
we need regulation, but they don't want regulation because they want profits and they want power. And there's no happy future without regulating these giant multi-billionaire people and their platforms because if we want to have freedoms and we want human rights, we can't allow authoritarians to take away facts about bad behavior.
Yeah, many of the people are mesmerized by his persona, and they're also fearful of what he's telling them is going to happen if he is not elected. We're going to get overrun by immigrants. Everything's going to fall apart, the economy. In fact, I've spoken to people who have knew from the inside the economy was not doing very well under Donald Trump, but it's a fallacy. And he's promoted this fallacy, and people actually think it was true, but none of it's true. What do you
Yeah.
say about
So
that?
yeah, so we know how the mind works. And unfortunately, if we hear a lie over and over and over again, the brain starts acting as if it's true, especially if it's coming from someone who has a position of authority or had a position of authority. So we just need to understand how the mind works. We also have to understand that we have an emotional defense system to protect ourselves from danger. So things that are fearful, things that make us angry or disgust us, are going to take over our brain stem and get us out of our critical thinking parts of our brain that can analyze facts and say what's actually going on here and what's true. And the media knows this. There's an old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Let's use the most sensationalistic, fear-mongering, clickbaity titles to get more viewers. Unfortunately, it created ideal conditions for brainwashing people en masse because you can't think logically if you're acting out of a state of fear.
Right. And repetition is key here. The more they say it, the more people believe it. Oh, where have I heard that before? I know I've seen it also in the legal world too. I've written numerous briefs on this. I'm
Well,
actually writing.
Hitler, the big lie, and Goebbels, just said the bigger the lie and you repeat it over and over again, normal people can't imagine somebody lying with certainty. So they assume that there must be information that this person has. They don't realize that we're dealing with psychopaths who don't care about what's true or how many people get harmed or the public good. And that's why we need to look at these predators as cancer cells. We can't allow cancer cells to take over our human body. We die. But
Right.
that's what's going to happen if they take over the world.
Hmm.
Humanity is going to suffer.
Right. In your book, you also write about the organizations behind the Christian right. You talk about the fellowship. You talk about the New Apostolic Reform, the NAR
Yeah.
Reformation, and Opus Dei.
Yes.
I was
So
amazed.
So there are cults in the cult of Trump. In chapter 7, I actually put Putin at the top. And I think I put the family that Jeffrey Charlotte did 2 books and a Netflix series about that was recruited. This is the people who do the National Prayer Breakfast. They were recruiting Republicans and Democrats over decades. That's another cult group, anti-communist cult group. Opus Dei, there's a fabulous book that just is coming out on October 1st by Gareth Gore on Opus Dei as a mind control cult that and its influential figures such as Leonard Leo and Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation Project 2025. Opus Dei is a destructive authoritarian mind control cult. New Apostolic Reformation is not mainstream Christian evangelicals, contrary to what the media says. These are cultic groups where the leader says, I'm a prophet and I speak directly to God, or I'm an apostle. And they typically speak in tongues, claim to cast out demons, do faith healings, but they operate BITE. They control their members' behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, and indoctrinate a pseudo identity into them that's dependent and obedient. And we're looking at 30 to 40 million Americans in these NAR
Wow,
groups and
that's
mega
incredible.
churches. And when the public goes, how can they believe Trump won the election in 2020? It's because their prophet told them so and said, don't believe Satan, don't believe the Democrats, they're evil. And so they're going to follow their prophet because they are so afraid of demonic possession. That's what they've been programmed with phobias about.
In your book, you even write that Opus Dei Bill Barr, the former AG, he was a member.
Yeah, he was on their board of directors, in fact, at their Washington, D.C. center. And he was also the AG during the Russian infiltration of the FBI. Robert Hansen was an Opus Dei operative. And Gareth Gore did an interview with me. It's on my podcast out Monday, September 30th, The Influence Continuum, and my Substack, where I interview Gareth Gore about this book on Opus Dei. And he names names and he has documents from the founder of Opus Dei on how to deceive and manipulate, recruit, and indoctrinate people into his cult.
It's so interesting you mentioned Robert Hansen. I just did an interview with Glenn A. Fine, former Inspector General, and of the Department of Justice, and also the Department of Defense, and he told me about that, and it was incredible because he saw it from the inside, and he actually had to interview Robert Hansen. So it was quite an
And Barr
operation, but
protected Opus Dei and said Opus Dei had nothing to do with it. In fact, his Hansen's wife discovered that he was spying for the Russians, talked to Opus Dei priest, reported her husband, and the priest initially said, "You have to withdraw," and then he said, "No, keep going." And so there's a direct link with Opus Dei and Russian spying on the United States, unfortunately, that William Barr knew about.
so I guess what do American people do to fight back against this inherent takeover by these organizations? I mean, is it just the media? What can they do?
So I'm a big advocate. I say it's your mind and only you should control it. And I'm a big advocate for teaching people how to discern for themselves who's trustworthy, who's not trustworthy. I mean, a good leader doesn't say they're perfect. They don't say they know more than the generals or the economists when they have no education whatsoever or they don't read books, right? You need to be able to evaluate experts and sources. You need to be able to reality test. And again, not be on your phone all day long, mindlessly doom scrolling, but actually learn the facts and organize with other people who want human rights, women's rights, gay rights, indigenous rights, rights of people to speak truth to power. I mean, Trump has literally said if he takes over, he's going to weaponize the DOJ as he did against Michael Cohen, his former attorney who did the hush money payments for Stormy Daniels. He literally put him in jail. William Barr put him in jail, and Michael Cohen wrote a book called Revenge on this
Yes,
topic. We can't allow that. If we want to have a system of rule of law and justice system, we all need to make sure that Trump doesn't get into power, and anyone who says the election was stolen and says that January 6th were patriots, they should not be allowed anywhere near any positions of authority.
Michael Cohen said he was in solitary confinement. I mean, that's pretty bad for
Well,
something that he did. Put him in
well,
solitary.
yeah, he misrepresented to Congress the number of times that Trump that he was aware Trump interacted about Russian hotels or something like that. It was a minor thing, but they wanted him to not write his book, and it was a coercion thing to threaten his wife and everything else. And Michael, to his credit, just said, "Put me in jail. I'm not turning." And I'm not giving up my right to publish my book and tell the truth.
And now, where do you see some of this brainwashing, to change gears just a little bit before we close? Where do you see some of this with, in domestic family situations? Do you see undue influence and coercive control there? And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So the people need to understand that cults are not just religious cults where people wear robes or are in some compound somewhere, that there can be cults of personality. And there can be individuals, often fathers or mothers, who are extreme narcissists or malignant narcissists, and they can operate in a family system controlling behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make everyone dependent and obedient on them and pushing down people's authentic selves, their consciences. Many times, children may be gay, for example, but they're in a homophobic family structure, so they're told that this is sinful and don't allow people to be their own person. And then there can be elder abuse situations where a family member controls the father or the mother to give the money over to them instead of to their rightful heirs. And this is called undue influence. In fact, Elder Justice California has a whole website and a methodology for California state workers to evaluate undue influence over elderly folks. So I want everyone to understand cults can be one-on-one, they can be therapy-esque cults, they can be religious cults, political cults, commercial cults, including multi-level marketing or trafficking, sex trafficking or labor trafficking, or corporate cults like Enron or Theranos that have this bite model structure to them.
It's amazing. And I hope that some of the courts will become savvy to this. I think it's a work in process. So
So I want to
we,
ask any of your listeners who is a lawyer or interested in the law or judges to look at my doctoral dissertation because I pretty much take the brainwashing models, explain them, connect it to trafficking law, which is illegal, force, fraud, or coercion. So I connect the dots with that. Then I use a model by law professor emeritus Alan Shefflin called the social influence model that experts can say, this is the influencee, this is the influencer, and let's look at the processes and consequences of this relationship over this person. And so there's a formula with my bite model as a scientifically validated construct for lawyers and judges to argue and criminalize brainwashing.
well, I look forward to that, and I do hope there will be some changes in the legal system because it's people do not understand the severity of those issues and their
Yes.
impact. Well, thank you. This has been an enlightening interview. I thank you for your time and your expertise. And I look forward to reading more on your
Yeah,
work.
thank you so much. And check out my interview with Gareth Gore on Opus Dei. I did an interview with a psychologist on coercive control, with Lisa Nierenberg on elder abuse. There's a lot of interesting people I try to cover in my research and my interviews.
Well, thank you for that. I want to thank our guest, Dr. Stephen Hassen, for sharing his insights and opinions on cults and their ability to control the minds of their followers. I also want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guest, visit us online at thelegaledition.com. As always, this information is for general educational purposes. It is not to be construed or relied upon as legal or personal advice. And please consult a qualified practitioner as your own legal or personal needs. And don't forget, subscribe online. Find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, now X. And subscribe to our publication on Substack.